I was drawing all these kind of kid type things, and I had this great disappointing moment because I had wanted to have this wonderful junior high school teacher as an art teacher who was fun and loved to talk about anything but art, and which I thought might be interesting. And then I got the other guy, the serious, tough guy, and at age 11, wandered into that classroom, and he looked over at the sketchbook that I carried around with me at the time, and he saw these. I was doing these comic book superheroes, you know, the Superman and Batman people. They all had these great muscles, and he looked at the drawings and he said, "You know, I think you're onto something, but you're looking in the wrong places." And he said, "I'll be right back," and came back with a book, and it looked like this Italian artist. The name was on 2 lines. His name was Michael Angelo. And I thought, well, who's that? So he said, I'll let you keep it as long as you like, but take good care of it and be sure to give it back. And that changed everything for me. Everything.
So I guess he was someone who really had a great effect on your work, but were there others that affected how you developed as well? Other mentors or?
I think the only add-on to that was my father, who had he came to the country when he was a teenager, and so he had a great respect for all of the American institutions, and so the New York Public Library became a place of worship, and the Metropolitan Museum. And I say those were probably the 2 impacting elements as I moved to the next level onward to college. I was determined at that point I was going to be an artist forever, and I was going to be like Michael Angelo.
So you've been quoted as saying that your life has been characterized by winning by losing. So what's that about?
Well, that rose up pretty soon afterward, because with the idea of being an artist who had to know everything about everything, I looked around, and at that time, Syracuse University was the oldest art school in America, and also had, I don't know if any of those guys are here today. We saw them at lunch yesterday. He had some trouble today. Anyway, so I said, that's where I'm going to go and find out about all of these things. and indeed, it was exactly as pictured. It was a kind of school of Munich transported to upper New York State. It was wall-to-wall discipline. It was hours and hours of anatomy, perspective, composition, figure painting, costume painting, portrait painting, and I loved it. I really rejoiced in being there. And a year went by, and a second year went by, and In fact, I had lunch with one of the Syracuse people yesterday, and they showed me pictures of the art school as I remembered it, because there's a new Sol LeWitt sculpture on the lawn there. But I remembered it's on a hill. It looks like an ancient Gothic building. They don't actually use it as an art school anymore. But at the time, it looked like something out of Wuthering Heights, and you came up on this long, winding stairway from the street to the hill. And as I climbed the stairway, I heard the sound of, well, it could only be characterized as great chunks of rock hitting something very hard. And I came around the bend at the top and had an astonishing moment. Among the disciplines of those 2 years that were so beloved was something that is just beginning to come back in the teaching world. It was called cast drawing. I don't know if any of you. Cast drawing had to do with, it was a vast room filled with plastic replicas of works by Michelangelo, Bernini, Rodin, and we would spend hours and hours making charcoal copies of them. It was a beloved activity, and it was an opportunity to demonstrate your skill beyond imagining. Anyway, coming up the hill, hearing the sound of slabs hitting metal, I rounded the bend, and there was this giant truck parked behind the school, and 2 guys were tossing our beloved casts into this truck, and they were smashing against the truck bed, gone forever. So, what had happened? Over the summer, something which to this day, having gone into academic life at one point, I still can't understand. They had somehow dismissed the entire faculty of the school and hired an entirely new faculty from the Art Institute of Chicago, who was known for its avant-garde interest, who couldn't have cared less about any of the things we'd been up to for 2 years. They were interested in color, they were interested in design, they were interested in concept. And I was, of course, in total despair. But it turned out to be probably the best example of winning by losing that I've ever had. It was certainly the defining moment in the next round of becoming an artist. And it's only happened once in the history of the school that one would have been exposed to 2 years of that intense academic rigor and then completely turned around into a world of light and color and exploration and new vistas. So that was my first example of winning by losing. There have been tons of them, which I won't bother you with too much with now.
I think that when we first met, you said that we probably learned the most in what we think is the losing part, and I think you're right about that. I see that you've done a lot of teaching. So did that influence your work or your thoughts about your work? Or?
Well, I came to teaching pretty late in the game. When I had shows in New York, I would get offers for teaching, and they were usually some faraway Midwestern goal to reach. And I actually felt that I wanted to remain in New York at that time. We were living almost by accident at the epicenter of what was happening in the 1960s. And some of you may remember the 1960s as the moment that literally changed everything. Changed everything in terms of our society. It changed everything in terms of the music that was being created, in terms of the art. So we were there, and I was reluctant to leave. But at some point, I had some offers for teaching in New York that seemed interesting. And I was probably about 45 when I said, okay, let's do it. And it's been really one of the most illuminating experiences for me imaginable. For example, a little later on, as I was climbing the academic ladder, I was asked to do a seminar, a faculty seminar on nurturing creativity. Nurturing creativity. So I thought it was worth spending a bit of time on. And eventually I looked into every aspect I could find of what had been researched, what had been written about human creativity, and there was very little agreement. Very little agreement. But there was one area on which there was total agreement, probably the only one, which indicated that we are all born with this wonderful creative ability. And either you remember it in yourself or you remember your kids or your grandkids doing these unbelievably original and wonderful and personal things, which, and then the next area of general agreement is that it becomes slowly extricated, removed from the young person, so that by the time they're 7 or 8, interests turn more toward approval of their peers rather than expression of their own feelings. So there's a turnaround there. And then they have an opportunity to come back to it in their teenage years. And when they do, they come back with a kind of wonderful spirit. It was Arthur Miller, the playwright, who said, when you're young, you feel you can change the world with your art. So when they come back to that with that spirit, teaching becomes very exciting. It's a wonderful engagement with young people, and actually I've seen that played out with people who've had who are going to art schools. People, for instance, at Dartmouth College, when I visited there was no fine art program, but they were just so sensitive and intelligent and reaching out for the possibility of changing the world with their art. And at one time I was teaching a class of high school teachers who were taking the summer program for extra credit. And there they were, feeling the same way. So I felt a lot of input from those moments of teaching engagement. And then, for me, when it comes to giving advice, when it comes to encouraging that moment, there was another quote, trying to think of who it was, the wonderful movie director who did On the Waterfront and all of those 50s. Elia Kazan, right. And when he was getting those performances from those people, on one of the interviews, they asked him how he got those responses. And he said, I just told them, surprise yourself. And that became a kind of central element in my teaching, and then in my own work. That surprise yourself element is something that goes beyond anything I've seen in its effectiveness with them and with me. So,
thank you. Let's talk about your work now. We've seen in this show that you have several different mediums that some of us are not so familiar with. So can you say something about the difference between a painting and a monotype and maybe sublimated print, just to give us an idea of what the different ways in which you produce this amazing art that we see in this room?
Cynthia, this could be an opportunity to put everybody to sleep.
We don't want to do that.
Make it very, very, very simple. I mean, actually, last night there were a number of people who asked me about some of those things. Briefly, at the time I left art school, we were concerned with the disciplines really of oil painting, watercolor, pastels, and then things changed. In the 1950s, the acrylics were evolving, and I'm sure there are some of you or many of you here who've had experience with what has happened in that world. They've developed a range of potential and possibilities with acrylic materials that would have been unimaginable 50 years ago. So actually, I work largely in acrylic. I use many of their devices of thinners and thickeners. People were asking me about some of the buildup of textures, and those are all qualities which can be achieved with that medium. When it comes to something like the monotypes, that for me is exciting, and it is for many, many of you, I'm sure. That in effect is making an oil painting, which is going to be on paper, except you do it indirectly. You have a smooth surface. It could be it could even be glass. It could be a plastic. It could be a metal surface, and you paint with oil paint on it, and you paint directly, and you paint freely, and you can paint emotionally, and you can scrape it out, and you can score it, and then you can paint on top of it. And then when you have gone through all of that, and then you can wipe it out and push it around, and it's all oil paint, and then you run it through a press with rag paper, and out comes the image, an oil painting on paper, and usually full of surprises because of the things you have done in a kind of emotional attack on that plate. Those etchings are kind of interesting in that the ones in the show here came from a series of drawings that I did of magnolias in California. Eventually they found their way out into the world through the gallery that I was working with. And years later, I always wanted them back. So years later, I was able to buy them back at auction. The last one belonged to the director of the Amon Carter Museum in Texas. And she died, and it became available. And then I had my drawings back, And I had heard about the possibility of turning them into etchings so that you could make an edition of them. And there are some master printers who can photographically take that drawing, reproduce it on a copper plate, etch it with acid, and it's theoretically ready to print. It's also theoretically ready to be sent back to me to work on it further as an etching plate. And you can do that in any number of ways. And then send it back to the printer and print an edition. So that's what you see in the way of the gravure. Etchings, and what's the other medium I have there?
Sublimated.
Oh, the sublimate, yeah, well, those are wonderful. And that's a really relatively recent development. And it's a process that evolved from, I mentioned this to a few people. I had a show in New York about a year ago, and one of the major paintings, which had been in a previous retrospective, I didn't want to include in the show because it was not going to be for sale. I had painted it for my wife, and it was part of something I was going to keep. So there was a question of then what to do, and we then heard about the process of the sublimated print, by which they can take the image of your painting, of my painting, and by a process of pressure and heat, transfer that image to an aluminum plate. And it came out beautiful. Well, that's the one over there. That's the one we were talking about.
Gorgeous,
and,
beautiful.
It's really a wonderful process, and it's enabled me to take paintings which I'd like to keep for myself or for my family and actually have rather accessible, less costly reproductions, copies made of those works. And it's a beautiful medium. Love it. I think that's about what we have here, right?
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, how do you get an idea for a piece? I mean, do you plan it, or do you just go for it and it happens? What happens in that process?
I'm a planner. I plan. I make sketches. I do color studies, and then I used to have this sign over my easel that said "Begin," and I needed that, and but then something happens along the way. And I'm sure, again, the artists among us, I'm sure, recognize, or maybe not. Maybe you take that sketch and realize it through all the processes to the end. In my case, something kind of unaccountable happens. It's as though the painting takes over. Sometimes it's called serendipity, where something wonderful that is unsought for just appears in the process. And it's almost as though the painting takes on its own direction, and I become sometimes a spectator in the process. So it's a strange way to work. I'm sure I'm not alone, but it is one of those winning by losing things in a way, because I start with this very clear thread and direction, and along the way it becomes something entirely different. In the end, I have the privilege of surprising myself, and but I haven't figured out any other way to do it.
So I've been looking at all of your pieces, and there are a couple of surprises on a couple of these pieces, and one is in the painting behind you. So I'm looking at these beautiful flowers, and then all of a sudden, I see something at the bottom, and it looks like it's a dog. And so can you tell me how that comes to happen as well?
Well, it is a dog. But not a real dog. I mean, it's really an allegory, metaphor. Actually, it really indicative of that process we were talking about a minute ago, during which things evolve, and the whole mystery of nature, and particularly of flowers. I mean, after all, they are about as close as we come to miracles in our daily lives. And of course, I've painted flower fields in many places at many times. And when I finished this one, I thought, you know, you're making them awfully accessible to people. And that's really not the way life always goes. And sometimes in order to access the beauty that you're pursuing, you have to get past some resistances. So there's the allegory, the flower field, which one of the ones I've painted many times, and then I put that moment of something you had to get past to get in there, and I don't know, did you get past it?
I definitely did. I loved it. So, one or two more questions, and then we'll ask if people here would like to ask questions, because I'm sure they do have some. The question I have is, I love the butterflies. I love them. And I wondered how that evolved for you, the painting of the butterflies. This series is pretty incredible. So,
well, that's a great question, because we have a prime witness in the audience here. Let me tell you a little bit about how that happened. We were on a family togetherness holiday in the north of Italy, in the Tyrol, in the area just between northern Italy and western Austria. And it's beautiful. Those of you who've been there know it's just that wonderful pre-mountain space filled with greenery and growth and wonder. And we were staying in a spa, and everybody was exhausted after their morning's workout in the spa. So my daughter and her husband, parents of my granddaughter, Katie, said, "We're going to our room. Why don't you and Katie paint something?" And Katie, of course, said, "Oh, sure, let's do it." So we went up to my room, and it was one of those gray northern Italy days. The fog was coming in, rain was coming down lightly, and we settled down and said, "Okay, what shall we paint?" And then I said, "Well, let's look out at the landscape." Of course, we looked out at the landscape and we couldn't see anything, except, now this was kind of a once-in-a-lifetime moment. out of all of this gloom and mist came a single butterfly. And we both looked at each other and we said, okay, let's paint butterflies. And we did. She did a wonderful one. She was finished with it in a few hours, and I've been painting him ever since.
Well, I have finished with my questions, but I bet there are a lot of great questions out here. So does anyone have one that they want to ask Mr. Kaish at this point? Come on, don't be shy. Here we go.
Your paintings are so gorgeous, and they're so inspiring, and they capture this beautiful light, this beautiful golden light. And you say a little bit about how that inspired you. How do you capture the light in your paintings, the golden sunlight? Do you use special techniques?
That's really something I hadn't thought about for a while. I think it probably started in Italy. We haven't spoken about that, but Italy has been kind of a second home. Probably more or less 5 years have been spent there at different times. And in the times in Florence especially, and I was also teaching for 10 summers in Florence, and part of that was visiting and revisiting the museums and the churches. And the sense of golden light that they were able to achieve really intrigued me. And all I can say is that in terms of the physicality of it, it would be a kind of putting down a base, warm, intense tonality of if I'm working in oranges or yellows or reds, and then glazing a very thin tonality over it, so that, and starting with a very, very white base, because the old masters, as dense as their paintings look, were certain to start from white ground, so that no matter what was put on top of it, you'd have that light entering and bouncing back. So I would say very, very white ground, color of choice, glaze for subtlety, and that's pretty much the way it happens in my things.
Hi, Mr. Kaish, I studied with you in one of those times in Florence. I was so excited when I saw
those were the days, right?
It was amazing. I'm Gina. Oh my gosh, what a joy to see you. I reached out to everyone that was in the class. I said, oh my God, Mr. Kaish is going to be here. And your work is so inspiring. But as you talk, all I can feel and sense and just literally almost feel like I'm going to cry. Because God's beauty and the majesty and the wonder that He creates. Wow, I am going to cry.
Me too.
Every day for us to enjoy is such a gift, and the way you've captured it is so of God. And I just wanted to ask, do you believe in God?
Oh, that's a very good question, and the answer is yes.
Yeah, it's so apparent in your work, and even the process is so beautiful of really how we're meant to live. That's all I keep feeling in my heart as hearing you talk.
Oh.
It's just the beauty that we're just so trapped in the worldly things all the time, and the freedom that we're meant to live in is so liberating, and art is such an unbelievable expression of that. That's truly remarkable. So thank you for sharing your gift of why you were created in this world. You have done really well.
Bless you, thank you. And these people can have no idea really of what you all created during those times in Florence. It was really.
Question here too. This person is very anxious.
Hi.
This is
Hi.
my daughter Kaya.
Hi.
Hi,
What's happening?
just that your artwork is so impressed, and I really want to learn how to do those artworks. And they're so beautiful and gorgeous.
Oh, bless you. That's probably the nicest thing I'm going to hear today.
Do we have others? All right. Coming.
Other than Michael Angelo, what other artists affected you?
Actually, my next obsession was with Rembrandt. And he's largely responsible for some of the golden light that you're referencing. We spent a lot of time together, especially the very late works. Really astonishing when he got to the point where the riches had gone and he was just doing it because he had to do it. And those are some of the most astonishing things. And some of them are in the Hermitage and not that easy to access. But really. So he was next. Then later on, and I think it's fairly obvious, the post-impressionists, Bonnat, Vuillard, I mean, they were just geniuses. And of course, their lives were all about color and the kind of wonders of life around us. So those are pretty much the primary people.
Anyone else? Okay.
Sometimes I paint something and I throw it out, and then my daughters will find it and bring it in and frame it. And I just wondered if you ever feel like, well, gee, I really don't like this. And how do you get past that?
You know, I have a daughter too. And I think you're right on, absolutely. The only other thing is I now tend to be willing to put something aside before getting too angry or upset about it, because for those of you who've been this route, you know that the involvement becomes kind of overwhelmingly intense. I mean, it's far beyond any rational engagement between you and a paintbrush and a surface. And so the emotions run high, and there would be a natural tendency if it hadn't worked, quote, to discard it. I now tend to hang on to it a little bit longer than I used to. So I would say hang on to it a little longer than you used to.
Well, thank you all for your time today, and Mr. Kaish, thank you so much for
Thank
being
you for being
here.
here.